Comic Timing is member supported by listeners like you over at patreon.com/comic timing. Welcome to 2025 and welcome to any of you who are donating to the show for as little as $1 a month. You can go ahead and keep this show running as long as we can possibly make it happen. Plus, you get access to some extra content like reviews occasionally, some diaries, occasional extra points that will be released ahead of time on the Patreon feed, and a whole lot more where that came from. And we're looking forward to a big 2025 here from Comic Timing. So thank you all for your continued support of the show once again at patreon.com/comic timing. Hey there, folks. My name's Ian Levinstein, and welcome to a special edition of Comic Timing. This is a syndicated episode, and also I'm in a very different space if you're watching the video version, as I'm set up in my bedroom. The camera angle is probably going to be entirely different because I don't have a lot of places to put the good camera, and I tried to make it work as much as possible. But hey, you get to see some different books for the first time. So, hey, how about them apples? Anyway, this is a episode of Back to the Bins that aired last year, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away where things were very, very different for a whole lot of us, myself included. But nonetheless, our good friend Paul Spataro invited myself, Adam Murdough, Shane, and Chris Eberle on to Back to the Bins to discuss some books, and we had a great time doing so. Paul also provided me with the video of that recording, so any of you folks who are subscribed to the YouTube channel will be able to watch this in full video. Not nearly as many interstitials or shared content as I would normally have, as I wasn't the man behind the actual, video process. But if memory serves, there are at least a couple of quick shares here and there as we go along. But this one is going to focus on some Captain Atom action from pre-DC, as well as some Wally West Flash, and a dog barking in the background that hopefully you cannot hear as I'm recording this, but if you can, that's New York City for you. What can you do? We also have the first appearance of the Ted Kord Blue Beetle in the DC universe, as well as a Frank Miller Daredevil deviation for us by Chris Eberle. So I really do hope that you enjoy this episode. I wanted to get some content out there for you to start the year off right in this first week of January 2025, and we weren't quite ready to record yet, so might as well throw out there something that you may not have heard before. If any of you have not checked out Back to the Bins before, please make sure to do so. Paul Spataro is an awesome guy, and he has had all of us on a bunch of different times. And I can't wait to record with him next, hopefully sometime in the not too distant future, whether it just be myself or whether it be with other fellow podcast brethren. But nonetheless, here we are with episode 603 of Back to the Bins. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Bins. I'm Paul Spataro, and I am once again happy to be recording with my buddies. And on my screen, going clockwise, we have Mr. Christopher Eberle, Mr. Adam Murdough, Mr. Shane Mulholland, and Mr. Ian Levinstein. Not a woman in the house, but still a good bunch of guys. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Doing good.
I could got some Edith Bunker if you wanted to have a woman's voice.
Sure, go ahead.
Archie. It's almost like a cross between Edith Bunker and Marge Simpson when you do that, Shane.
Yeah, well, that's a little crusty. Yeah,
that's a little too crusty.
So, just quick before we get into this, the guys just told me they're going to be doing a movie retrospective review of Planet of the Apes, which is one of my all-time favorites, and you can find my review of it on Is It Yours? But I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say, so I'm looking forward to that one being released.
Yep.
And,
It'll be my Wahlberg one, right?
as long as it doesn't have Mark Wahlberg, although we did review that on Is It Yours as well.
I'm guessing one of them was Jaws and the other one wasn't.
that is good. Now, if you've ever listened to Is It Jaws, and I don't know that anybody has, but we do a Jaws scale, which is a change off of the actual rankings of the movies. So you either rank it Jaws, saying it's like a classic movie, Jaws 2 saying it's a very good movie, you could watch it over again, but not quite classic, Jaws 3, it's okay, I watched it, but that's it, and Jaws 4 is bad. Now that changes from the real movies, because in my mind, Jaws 4 is actually so bad that it's funny, so it gets ranked as a Jaws 3, and Jaws 3 is awful, so it's a Jaws 4.
Jaws 3
anyway.
was terrible.
Come on, Jaws 3 was in 3D.
I was going to say,
Jaws
wasn't
4
that
probably
3D?
paid for Michael Caine's Summer Home? So, come on.
Yeah, exactly. But Jaws 4 is so silly and over the top silly that it's fun for me to watch.
It was really funny when Jabberjaw came out at the end and started dancing around.
No respect.
But I believe my ranking was Planet of the Apes got ranked as Jaws, and Planet of the Apes 2000 surprisingly got ranked as a Jaws 3, not a Jaws 4.
Wow.
Because when I rewatched it for the sake of reviewing it, I thought just slightly more highly of it than I did before I was reviewing it, which is usually just the opposite.
It had potential, but boy, there's one or 2 points where they could have fixed it and they didn't, and that just ruined the whole rest of the movie then.
And what I come back to on that is when it came out on DVD, there was a commentary track by Tim Burton, and at the end of the movie when they have their surprise ending, Tim Burton said, I could explain how I was, what scientific basis I was giving for this ending, but I don't want to, in case somebody else decides to make a sequel, I don't want to handcuff them. It's like, Tim, who's making a sequel to this piece of crap?
I found that Tim Burton's movies are better when it's his own original stories rather than when he tries to adapt other people's stories. That's been often my experience. Plus, if you're going to remake Planet of the Apes, remake the actual novel, which they didn't have the money to make back in 1968.
Right.
That's what they should have done.
But they did do a good job when they did Rise of the Planet of the Apes and all of those movies. I enjoyed those.
I haven't seen all of those yet.
Those are good, but that's like those are totally different stories. And that remake tried to, it was meant to be a remake, and I just thought it was god awful.
At this point, I think the best adapted thing that Burton's ever done is actually probably Wednesday for Netflix.
Oh, Wednesday's awesome. Batman's awesome too.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say Batman's technically an adaptation.
I mean, yeah,
that's
but
top of the.
I almost consider Batman and Batman Returns to be their own thing, rather than even things that Burton has done. That it's a whole other echelon and level for me. It's on the Batman scale if you want to go up to the Jaws scale rather than Burton's other stuff. So it's Batman and then everything else Burton has done.
Well, see, it just I don't want to go too long with this tangent, but for me, the top thing if I look at Burton's filmography, number one on my list is probably Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
I do like Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Pretty damn close to the top for me too, Paul.
Yeah, I do like Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yep. It's still, I've seen it I don't know how many times, and it's so old, and it still makes me laugh every time.
Good point. Yep.
Anyway, I got you guys here to talk comics as much as we could just kind of shoot the breeze all night. And as I started to say earlier, you guys have saved me the trouble because between you picked 4 books to do. So we got a lot of comic covering to do. And it's interesting how the choices, to me, if you just told me the 4 books and said, tell me who picked each of these, I would have no problem. I would have no problem knowing exactly who brought each one. So I think that's actually kind of cool.
And if time becomes a problem, we can skip mine because Adams has some of mine in it, just in a different way.
A little bit. Yeah.
We can do mine another time.
I did find that connection to be kind of cool.
Yeah,
but
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I was thinking because the last time you guys were on, Ian and Adam weren't able to make it. I was thinking we'd go to theirs first.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
but I am totally willing to go whatever order you guys want.
No, go for it.
It's your show, Honey Pie.
All right. Merge, you want to go first since yours is the oldest?
Okay, I guess that's one way of looking at it. All right. I'm bringing the independent selection to the table here, technically. You could classify it as DC if you want, because after the fact, the output of this publisher became part of the DC canon. But at the time, it was an independent publisher. And we're talking about Charlton Comics here. We're going back to the Charlton Silver Age, to March of 1967 for Captain Atom, Volume 1, number 85, March of 67. And here is the cover of my copy right there on screen for whoever happens to be able to see it. And
that is just me. we only post audio, but
I dressed up for nothing.
No, but you know what? If you guys want the video copy to put on your feed, that's fine. I can send that over to Ian.
Okay, cool.
I was going to do Charlton, made in Carolina. Some dance, some prance, some even have a little romance.
And so on. So anyway, this is the late 60s, and we're kind of into what could be thought of as the Charlton superhero renaissance, or Charlton action hero renaissance, perhaps we should say, because that's what Dick Giordano preferred to call those Charlton costume characters, just to set them apart from the rest of the superhero product in the market. This is one of those books that was revamped by former Marvel mainstay Steve Ditko when he came over to that company in the late 60s. He took over Captain Atom, and he co-wrote and penciled this issue, number 85, with the scripting that he usually worked with a dialoguer for the stuff that he did in the late 60s. And in this case, the script for the lead story was written by Dave Kaler, and Ditko's pencils were inked by Rocky Mastrosario, who lived only about a year after the publication of this issue, as it turns out. He died in 68 at the tender age of 41.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my God.
I didn't know that.
Yep, and the front cover is actually signed Ditko and Rocky. Yep, as you can see on the cover, it's actually a double feature because Captain Atom was sharing the back pages of his title with the then all-new Blue Beetle. This is the Ted Kord version of the character, who took up the Beetle baton from his predecessor, the Charlton version of Dan Garrett. So yeah, that's the backup story. Lead story is entitled "The Strings of Punch and Julie," and that's the reason why I chose this issue, because Punch and Julie are favorite villains of mine. I tend to go for the jester or puppet themed characters. As Chris will attest, he's read my undergraduate honors thesis from Penn State, which was all about the many faces of the mythological trickster archetype in superhero comics, and Punch and Julie definitely fit under that umbrella. So yeah, here's the opening blurb from the first page of this issue. One by one, important scientists are spirited away by two new threats to the nation's security. Punch, wily and warped by dreams of power. Julie, a lovely schemer with strange powers, are behind this wild plot, and Captain Atom finds it takes more than superpowers and clever gadgets when he and Nightshade are caught in the strings of Punch and Julie. And they misspell Julie's name in the banner title of the issue. They leave out the second E. So yeah, this it's significant here because not only is it the first appearance of these semi-important Captain Atom rogues, Punch and Julie, it's also the second appearance of Captain Atom's sometime partner Nightshade, Eve Eden, who had been introduced 2 or 3 issues earlier. And it was Captain Atom teaming up with his new friend Nightshade against the new villain, the Ghost, who is also present in this issue, albeit out of costume. Mm-hmm. And then Nightshade disappeared for a bit, and then she just kind of returns unheralded in this issue. It does say Nightshade returns in a caption on the front cover. So the action begins as Punch and Julie go about capturing their first couple of victims. Their scheme here in their first appearance is kidnapping important scientists from throughout the United States and just taking them to their lair on Coney Island, of all places, and submitting them to an alien brain drain device that will enable them to encode and capture all of their scientific knowledge and their knowledge of government secrets, which they can then sell to shadowy foreign agents or whatever. They never get far enough in their plan for us to see how that would play out. But this phase 1 is capturing all these known scientists. In the second scene, we see Captain Atom and Nightshade in their secret identities of Captain, I guess Alan was his first name in the Silver Age, Alan Atom and Eve Eden. They're at a pool party at the home of their new friend Alec Roy, who's an inventor and industrialist, who's also secretly the villain, the Ghost. So it's an interesting, it's one in several respects in which this story and the Charlton comics of the late 60s in general are kind of akin to the Marvel Silver Age. We've got here this character who is the main character's nemesis in costume, but he's unbeknownst to him or the heroes, their enemy. He's their best friend in their secret identities, but he's their enemy in costume. So here they are at a party at his house, but if they all knew who each other were in costume, they'd be battling it out. Also, we see Alec Roy, a.k.a. the Ghost, standing there in his arm in a sling. And there's a little caption saying that he injured said arm in Captain Atom number 82. So that there's actually some inter-issue continuity going on here in this fledgling Charlton action hero universe. So while they're at the party, Alec Roy is sealed up inside what appears to be a giant gem and spirited away by these mysterious villains. And Captain Atom and Nightshade then have to answer for their being present at this party, but failing to save their friend and important asset, Alec Roy, from being kidnapped to their superior. And the superior then dispatches them both to, the Nightshade is sent out in her new hover vehicle to investigate the disappearance, while Captain Atom is sent upstate to have his new altered atomic superpowers tested further, because this is a new development. This happened just the issue before this. This is only the second appearance of Captain Atom as he visually appears in this issue, with the silver undercoat, the blue tunic, the red leggings. Before that, he was wearing what looked like a red and gold chainmail outfit. So this is only the second appearance of the new look Captain Atom. He's got this layer of alien metal coating his body, and it's altered his radiation powers somewhat in ways that are still being understood by his government superiors. So he's being sent upstate to New York to have these powers tested further. Then there's kind of an interlude here where we see Punch and Julie reflecting on their origins, where we're told that they were just cheap carny crooks who ran a puppet show at the Coney Island amusement park, until one day while they were swimming on the beach, they found a chest filled with apparently alien devices, just little gadgets from some lost civilization, possibly, most likely alien, possibly from somewhere else on Earth. The scripter Dave Kaler kind of teases us with Julie wondering aloud, I wonder where that chest did come from. But anyway, it contained all the gimmicks and gadgets that Punch and Julie used to begin their life of crime. Punch's sky shoes and sting strings, which he uses to entangle his victims, and Julie's hypnotic gemstones, which he uses to cast illusions on her opponents. And it tells the story of how they subsequently set up shop in their secret headquarters on Coney Island and decided to embark on this first scheme of theirs to capture important scientists and drain their brains of secrets to be sold to the highest bidder. And it just so happens that their next victim is the scientist who is conducting tests on Captain Atom. So they go and they capture that scientist and also manage to capture Captain Atom, who is, as part of the test he's undergoing, has been drugged to lower the emission of radioactivity of his body. So they capture both of these people. Meanwhile, Nightshade is she gets a tip off that Punch and Julie have captured Captain Atom and taken him to Coney Island, so she rushes to the rescue. And meanwhile, Alec Roy, a.k.a. the Ghost, has, unbeknownst to everybody else present, come to. He removes his arm from his cast, revealing the circuitry of his miniaturized teleportation device. And while Captain Atom and Nightshade engage Punch and Julie in battle, he teleports away some of their alien gimmickry for his own criminal uses later on. Nightshade arrives on the scene, and she reveals a superpower that apparently in her only previous appearance, she had not made use of. We learn that she has the ability to transform herself into living shadow. So she uses that, and she's able to slip into the headquarters and rescue Captain Atom. The two of them engage Punch and Julie in battle, which goes on for several pages. They get the upper hand. They're able to rescue Alec Roy, and Punch is captured, but Julie gets away. So there's kind of a loose thread being deliberately left there to be picked up later on. So more of this continuity-oriented, subplot-driven storytelling that we're seeing here in the Silver Age of Charlton. And we end with a glimpse of no fewer than 4 individuals who would like to have revenge at a future time on their foes, Captain Atom and Nightshade. Punch in prison, Julie still on the loose, Alec Waugh, who's just about healed enough from the injury he sustained in issue number 82 to come back into action as the Ghost. And finally, reporter Abby Ladd, who is, Abby, the initials are the same as Ann Landers, probably not an accident there. She's kind of like Lois Lane meets J. Jonah Jameson. She's a muckraking reporter who's got a mat on for Captain Atom. And just wants to drag his name through the mud. And so we're teased that in the next issue, the Ghost will in fact return in the story The Fury of the Faceless Foe in number 86. And then, the part that's of most interest to Shane here, the backup story, which is the third appearance overall of Ted Kord in the role of the new Blue Beetle, concept and art by Steve Ditko. That includes the inking and lettering, I believe. And his scripting partner on this story is Gary Friedrich, whose work for Marvel in the 70s is well known to many. And this is just kind of a quickie story. It's only like 8 pages, I think. It begins with Ted Kord being just grilled mercilessly for one whole panel by an important supporting cast member, Detective Fisher, about the disappearance of Dan Garrett. And what role Ted Kord might have in that. And little does Detective Fisher suspect, of course, that Ted is actually a protege of Dan Garrett. He knows what happened to him. And Ted has secretly taken on Professor Garrett's mantle of the Blue Beetle in the meantime. But, so that's kind of a little nod to the past and also showing that there are repercussions for what happened to Dan Garrett, his disappearance and so forth. So that lasts all of 2 panels, and then we're launched right into the action of the issue, which is an 8-page battle, but it's Blue Beetle struggling to A, rescue a hijacked plane, B, track down and capture the enemy sub that appears to rescue the would-be hijacker, and C, wrestle an octopus. Yep, so we get to see the Beetle and his distinctive beetle-shaped airship, the Bug, in action, and showing off all of his cool gadgets and such. And it's and a little bit of a nod to past continuity, but mostly just 8 pages of the Beetle doing what the Beetle does. Yeah. And that's, in a nutshell, that is the comic that I chose to bring up here on this episode of Back to the Bins.
Masterfully summarized, brother.
Well done.
One thing that I wouldn't have known had you not brought it up, Murd, is that this issue is available on DC Infinite as one of the digital issues available. That's how I was able to read it, and they corrected that spelling mistake that you mentioned in the initial banner. So it actually has the proper amount of E's in Julie all throughout. So that's one of the many touch-ups they were able to do when digitizing it and I guess making it presentable for the digital crowd. It's like, oh, this mistake was made 60 years ago or whatever. Let's go ahead and correct that.
Yeah, that's I actually approve of that.
I was fully unfamiliar with this, and I'm not even totally familiar with a lot of Captain Atom's, post Silver Age appearances. So a lot of this was new to me, and I ended up, looking up on DC Wiki and seeing who these people were and what their backgrounds were and all of that. But it was a good read just the same. I bow my head in shame and say I had to read it on Read Comics Online because that was the only place I could find access to it. Hopefully Chris will be able to rejoin us in a moment. But anyway, probably somebody at the door or something. The interesting thing for me was to look at this from the perspective of the Ditko art. The story was fun enough, don't get me wrong, but seeing the Ditko art, because I've always found that Ditko was at his best when he would do either kind of a film noir kind of feeling, which he did a lot of times on those early Spider-Mans, a lot of deep shadows and different things that went on to create a kind of a mood, or if he did things that were really trippy, like Doctor Strange, in some sort of strange universe where everything is like freaky. In this one, it almost felt a little inconsistent because there's a lot of just regular scenes and that isn't where I feel like Ditko really excels. Again, I think that the stuff like once they got into the point where they were giving their origins and they show her putting the thing on and there's all the stuff around her head and everything, that was like kind of the Doctor Strange look. I thought the Blue Beetle short story actually seemed to be a little better artwork than in the Captain Adams story.
Because Ditko was inking himself on that one.
Yeah. Actually, that's probably the reason. Especially the scenes where he's wrestling the octopus. I think that those are beautiful. It looks like the lettering is almost typed.
I was going to say that because at least in the version that I was reading, it doesn't look like a very standard type of comic book lettering. As Paul says, it looks closer to a typeface than it does an actual, comic book lettering style. Whether that was intentional or not, or whether that's just how they did it in the digital version, I'm not sure. But that was the thing I was the least bit of a fan of, to be honest with you. It kind of drew me out of it a little bit because it was a little harder to read than your typical comic book lettering.
It's something I was never aware of, like I was never conscious of when I was reading just in general. And then I was listening to podcasts where some people started pointing out, oh, look at the lettering here. Look how they changed the typeface to give this mood. Look how they changed this. And all of a sudden I became more conscious of it. And I started thinking, it's surprisingly effective when the lettering is well done. And it's very subconscious. So that's an interesting thing, or an interesting aspect of it. But overall, like I said, I thought the story was pretty cool, and I got a kick out of who are these characters and moving forward and trying to figure them out. And I definitely got you mentioned the Silver Age Marvel thing. I got the feel of Ant-Man and Wasp and Whirlwind, with him being their chauffeur, but in secret knowing the only difference about that was he knew who they were and he knew he hated them. They didn't know that he did, though, so he was kind of like working behind their backs. But that's the feeling I got, and I am definitely curious to see where this story would go with the Ghost, and when they would eventually find out who they were dealing with.
One thing I'd like to point out that I think is great about Murd's selection is that the writer is actually a very important person in the history of comic book fandom. So Dave Kaler was a roommate of Denny O'Neil and Roy Thomas in the mid to late 1960s in the East Village. And I just know from reading over the years, from the history of comics, that he started some of the first comic book conventions in the United States.
Oh, wow.
He did 3, I think, in the mid to late 60s in New York City. He was heavily involved in the early fandom. So it was really, I didn't realize that he'd also written some comics. So it was great to see his name attached to this story. Great selection, Murd.
Wow. Thank you for that contribution, Chris. I'd never heard of Dave Kaler before.
Yeah, I just, as I've read like Tomorrow stuff over the years, his name will pop up sometimes in interviews and retrospectives. Interesting though, what I found, Murd, this came out in 1967?
That's right.
Okay, What's interesting, what as much as I enjoyed it, what made it a bit of a slog for me, it reads like early Silver Age writing rather than later Silver Age writing. And like, if you look at what Marvel was doing in 1967, in terms of the caliber of the scripting, I found the scripting difficult to get through. Just because I enjoyed the story, and anytime to see Ditko, I'm happy, even though I don't think this is some of Ditko's strongest art. But the scripting was a slog. I felt like I was reading early 60s Marvel, which I usually don't read anymore because I just can't get through the scripting for a lot of it.
At this point, wouldn't Marvel have been kind of more into like the cosmic stuff in the Fantastic Four?
Yes.
And a little bit more of like the maybe around the time when the Kingpin was appearing in Spider-Man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this to pick on the Charlton book. It's just that I thought when I read the story, I'm like, oh, this must have come out in like 1962 or something like that, because it reads like that period. But it came out so that just surprised me a little bit.
The first lines of the Blue Beetle one in particular. Talk, Cord. You came back from Pago Island alone. What did you do with Dan Garrett? Where is he? You can very much get the old school
radio serial
voice go in your head and have it work just as well. Yeah.
I could see this and I'm not saying the story itself, but just as far as familiarity with the way it's told and all, I could see this being similar to, say, like an early Iron Man Tales of Suspense story.
No, it's totally like that. Absolutely.
And I don't have a problem with those books, and I understand your point where you're saying sometimes they're a little bit of a slog. I seem to have a problem with those books, the real Silver Agey ones, when I try to read them in bulk, when I binge them. If I just pull one out and read it, or read 2 or 3 issues, I'm fine. But if I start getting into 5, 6, 7, 8, now it starts wearing me down.
Yeah, you just described me when as my CGS brethren know, as when we've gone deep into Stan Lee holes of the mid 60s. I can do about 5 or 6 at a time. Then I need to take a little bit of a breather before I go back to it, because it's just that campy and kitschy.
What's interesting about that, Ian, is that the way this book is written, this is the way Stan Lee was writing in the early 1960s. By the time I get to, and as Paul said, like 67, they're doing like cosmic stuff, and FF Spider-Man is pretty sophisticated. So it's an interesting contrast, and I always enjoy, me guys, like a time capsule like this, but it's also a reminder of how dramatically writing styles change as the medium is evolving and going in different directions. And it just, as I read it now in 2024, historically, a delight. Just as a reader, though, I was like, it's hard for me to do these anymore.
Shane, for that matter, Shane, I'm curious what you think of Ditko's design of the bug, which looks closer to the frog.
Yeah, I don't like the design of that bug in particular. Particularly, rather, I thought that it looked a little weird. I have maybe 1 or 2 issues of some kind of Blue Beetle in Charlton, but not many at all. And I know I've never really read any of it. But to see that, I was like, ooh, that really does look like a full-on bug with the head and the body and
the long, spindly limbs.
Really long. Yeah, everything else about the art and the character and all that part of the story was great until you got to the bug. I'm like, I don't like that design. I like current bug better.
Yep. I like I said, though, I'm pretty enamored with the underwater scenes. I think he did a great job with those.
Oh yeah, definitely. And of the 2 stories, I'm more into the Blue Beetle story than I am the Captain Atom story. Not that I don't enjoy Punch and Judy because I actually do. It's just this is more my bag. This is way closer to my typical superhero aesthetics, I think, than what Captain Atom brings to the table.
I had a lot of fun reading the Captain Atom and the Punch and Julie, though. I know I'd never read any of that before, so that was a lot of fun for me to see. I did not find it nearly as much of a slog as maybe some of you did, but I haven't read much from the early 60s through the late 60s. There's a few Justice League issues I've read, but nothing like what I'm sure Chris and maybe even Ian and certainly Adam have read. But mine was always like late 70s through today that I've read most of. So for me, it didn't. I expected it to be a little bit lighthearted and a little bit kind of vintage to what my mind was thinking it would be. So didn't bother me at all. Yep.
I mean, I've read most everything Marvel put out in the 60s, just about. So this writing style doesn't really faze me. And like I said, though, I think if I had too much of it, I'd probably, it would wear me out.
Sure.
Every once in a while we'll do an issue from this, somewhere around this time period from DC, which are much, much more Silver Agey than Marvel was at this point, and even more Silver Agey than this. We will read a Superman issue from 64, 65, somewhere around there, and I always have to pull myself back and try and review it based upon what they're presenting and who they're presenting it to, and try not to say, they're not looking to present this to 40, 50, and 60-year-old people. They're looking to put this to an 8, 9, 10-year-old, and I have to kind of review it from that perspective. Now, this might even be a little bit more sophisticated than that, where they're looking, 10, 11, 12-year-old. So I think, it's you kind of have to take it, even though I enjoy reliving that kind of feeling, but you have to take it from what it's meant to be. And from that perspective, I think this is a really solid book. And again, since it's something I'm not that familiar with, I'm kind of thankful that Adam picked this one out of whatever barrel you picked this one out of, but just because it gave me a glimpse into some of the history that I had never seen before. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, happy to broaden your Charlton horizons there.
How long was Charlton around?
Oh, they into the 80s.
Yeah, they had given up on superheroes long since. They were publishing like Hanna-Barbera
and war comics, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of like TV adaptations and not adaptations of actual TV episodes, but the characters from TV shows that would be put into stories, and they're famous for a very, very cheap printing method of like the quality of the paper that they
were out of Connecticut.
Yeah,
I don't know if I knew that they did.
For paying their creators a very, very low page rate, but they allowed them to do whatever the heck they wanted as long as they filled the pages. So
which is why Ditko was drawn to them after working at Marvel.
Right.
Wow. Sure. I don't know if I realized that they were had that much longevity. I kind of knew. I know a little bit more about the superhero side of the world just because DC acquired so many of the characters, but I didn't know that they did adaptations. I always think of Whitman Comics, Gold Key, and that like to do the TV kind of adaptation ones.
Right. Yeah, they had some similar properties though.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Before we move on, Murd, I'm curious, do you happen to know where you picked this issue up, whether it be at a con, a store, or otherwise?
I think I just got it from a discount bin at Golden Eagle, actually.
Nice.
It came in this. I'm not
I remember those.
What a great idea they were, right?
Right?
I don't think I've ever seen one of these. It's from a company called Better View, VUE Products.
Yeah, I have
and
one.
It's just like this heavy plastic sleeve. I don't even know if it's made of Mylar, baby, or not.
And then it's got 3 holes in it to go into a binder.
Those holes have never been punched out. I certainly don't keep it in a binder myself, but that's what it came in, and that's what I've kept it in ever since.
Nice.
So here on Back to the Bins, we do rate our comics, and we rate them with kind of a school grade. So I guess Chris is probably the most equipped to handle this. We rate the cover.
I'm sick of that, but anyway, go ahead.
The cover, the interior art, the story, and then overall. And I always say, the overall grade does not necessarily have to equal the sum of its parts. You could give everything a C, but say I love this book, and overall I'm going to give it an A. But it's however you choose to rate it, and we always let the person who synopsized it go first. So, Adam, you are on the clock.
Oh, okay. I may need to run it a little bit because I wasn't expecting this. Well, the cover is as those on the Skype call see before them. Lower 25% Blue Beetle, upper 75% Captain Atom with his giant. I like the cover dress, like the logo design, and of course the action scene with all the main characters there. I think I'd give that a B+. The interior artwork, I'll give that an A. The story, kind of a solid B. And then an overall grade? Or is there one more thing that I'm missing?
Overall grade.
Okay, B+.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say the cover is a little too busy for me, and it could be just a little darker. The colors are a little too bright for me.
With Punch and Julie?
Again, I have to factor in the audience it's meant for.
I mean, that's really going to be too polychromatic.
Anyway, I'm going to just say a B on the cover. Just it's not that it's bad in any respect. I just feel like if it was just a little deeper, it would be a little more intense looking to me. The interior art, it's good Ditko. It's not great Ditko. Like I said, and I think you guys, whoever had said it, I think hit it on the nose that I like the story inked by Ditko much more than I like the story that's not inked by Ditko as far as the artwork goes. So I'm going to say a B on the interior art as well. The story had me going. I kind of enjoyed reading this, so I'm going to say a B+ on the story, and overall I'm going to give the book a B+.
Okay. I think cover for me, I'll give a solid B. I think they did a pretty good job with letting us know what was going on, and I actually dig all the colors, and the bottom half being Blue Beetle and the top half being Captain Atom gives a decent amount of flow to it. The artwork I will give a B minus. It's the depth of field that I'm not a big fan of in the Captain Atom one. I feel like whether it's the inking or whether it's just the amount of time that Ditko had to work on the story, it's not nearly as full as it should be for me. Like, everybody seems to be on the same plane, when there should be a little bit more depth of field going on with the overall layout and what have you. So that's going to get a B minus for me. Story also B minus, I think, and overall I'll give it a B.
For me, it's a B straight across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in that camp because I love the cover, which would be B plus for me. The interior art, I agree the Captain Atom stuff isn't quite as intriguing as the Blue Beetle stuff, but I love Blue Beetle so much that kind of evens out to a good solid B for me. The story, I enjoyed the story, so I would give that a B plus because I enjoyed reading the Captain Atom stuff as well as the Blue Beetle stuff. I just thought everything was a lot of fun to read. I don't have a lot of exposure to it. And then just overall, I would average it all out to a B just because it was all really good for me.
All right.
Nice.
All right. So that's it for Captain Atom, and I guess we're going to move on to The Flash now.
Indeed. And this is issue 62 of The Flash, cover date of early May 92.
And I'm just going to jump in for a second, interrupt you, Adam, and say, I mean Ian rather, and say, by way of background, Ian gave us this book because he was going to be on the show like 3 years ago, and we've been waiting for this review since then.
That's right.
Now,
Now
it wasn't
go ahead.
quite that long. It wasn't quite that long. This is the book that I threw in there when Murdough and I weren't able to join the last time around. So not quite that long ago. Although for all I know, I may have also suggested 2 years ago. So who the hell knows? But nevertheless,
like 3 years.
It feels like 3 years. I agree with you, Paul. Flash Year One, Born to Run, Chapter 1. Written by Mark Waid. This is Mark Waid's first issue on the book for his long-standing, ongoing run on the Wally West Flash. The pencils are by Greg LaRocque. The inks are by Jose Marzan Jr., letters by Tim Harkins, and colors by Glenn Whitmore, edited by Brian Augustine, who was, again, a longtime DC editor who worked on most of the stuff for Mark Waid's run as well. So this starts off with the Flash Year One, and this is, of course, Flash Year One for Wally West, where Mark Waid went to put his definitive take on the origin story for Wally West to get things going. There have been sort of origins of Wally told in the past while he was Kid Flash and elsewhere, but this, to me, is in many ways a definitive version of Wally's origin even today. And I'll start off immediately by saying how fascinated I am with how well put together Mark Waid's voice of the character is right off the bat. Like, immediately, this is Mark Waid's Wally West. Personality-wise, writing, it's all there immediately from jump, and you could tell that this is going to be something special. And lo and behold, it still is special to this very day. And the issue starts off with Wally on one of his typical superhero outings. He stops a bomb from going off and barely has enough time to do so while at the airport. Hilariously, this is very much a 1992 airport rather than today, because the amount of airport security that would have been going on in today's world probably would not have allowed said bomb to be there in the first place in such a nebulous spot as it was. But 1992 versus today, you take that with a grain of salt. But either way, he's able to stop a bomb from going off at the airport, and barely does so with enough time to spare. And in doing so, winds up running into his grandfather, and sits down with the grandfather. Him and his grandfather aren't exactly the closest of terms, but as we get further on into the story, we learn that Wally is not really close to most of his family. The only real person he was close to was his Aunt Iris. Yeah. That his father and him had a very rocky road. His father was not very nice to him growing up. His mother was standoffish. And Iris was really that that beacon of hope that was thrown in there and a way for him to escape a little bit from his own life in where he was. So we get the scenes with the grandfather, and at this point in continuity, Iris West had died. There was a whole situation with her being in the future and all that jazz, and we're not going to bother going into that here because, shockingly, that's how she's no longer dead. But comic books, maybe comic books. Nevertheless, a lot of her belongings were at his grandfather's house. And he goes through them, and then that gets him reminiscing on his previous life when he finds something that was specifically left for him by Iris in said belongings. And we go back to when he was only 10 years old, and coming from Blue Valley, Nebraska, to spend the summer with his Aunt Iris, and that's where he first has a chance encounter with the Flash. And gets to, experience the Flash in person. He himself wearing a Flash shirt, so he was a fanboy. And then the fanboy actually gets to meet the Idol, because that's what happens when you go to visit his city. But he gets to experience the Flash stopping a criminal, and then is stuck with his Aunt Iris's boring boyfriend, Barry Allen, which he's like, oh man, I gotta deal with this guy. But of course, little does he know, Barry Allen is in reality the Flash, and he's left with Barry while Iris goes off to deal with a case, and in doing so, Barry introduces him to his friend, the Flash. With a little bit of speed shenanigans, winds up in front of Wally in the next room of Barry's apartment. Wally turns on the light, and there's the Flash there. And rather than just spend some time with Wally and get to know the kid a little bit and treat him to a wonderful afternoon of telling him about his adventures and maybe getting to know him a little bit. Instead, he restages the exact experiment that gave him his powers. To show him a little bit of how it happened, and lightning can't possibly strike more than once
in the same place, right?
Exactly, same place, the same time, and then lo and behold,
as we happen
strikes.
To be talking about it.
Exactly, and before you know it, lightning strikes. It hits Wally, and Wally is hit by the exact same chemicals and gets the exact same power shenanigans as his idol, and that's where the issue leaves off, and he dies, and we never hear from him again. No, instead he winds up becoming Kid Flash, and the story moves on from there. And this is where the first issue that Mark Waid worked on leaves off, and it's a really strong beginning here. I know I said it already, but I'll say it again. It captivates you. If you're not familiar with Wally West, this is the type of issue that will get you familiar with the character, both as an adult and in the past. You'll connect with him in ways you probably didn't connect with him before. The artwork is terrific. I'd say my one issue with it, and it's an issue that many artists have, so it's not just a shortcoming of this particular artist, Greg LaRocque, is that Greg LaRocque is not exactly good at making a 10-year-old look like a 10-year-old. Wally kind of looks like a full-grown adult that happens to be the size of a 10-year-old. It happens. That's part of artwork. I've lived to accept it for the most part, outside of a few artists here or there. But outside of that, the artwork is kinetic and it flows and it gets the story across the way that it's supposed to. And really, just in the end, it makes you want to read more. And there's a reason why Mark Waid's run is as well regarded as it is, and it's because it started off with a bang and it went on from there. So good on him for telling an origin story and making it pop. And this first issue really sung for me. So thrilled to check this one out.
Ian, I'm really sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, Chris, go.
Ian, I really am pleased that you selected this, because a big hole in my comic reading is I've never read any Mark Waid Flash.
Wow.
So it was great to have this introduction. I concur with everything you've said. I mean, even back in the 90s, Mark Waid is already a top flight comic book scripter, because, as you noted, he clearly establishes Wally not as a person and his family dynamic, and his just the nuance. Like, he's irritated they has to spend time with this lame boyfriend of his aunt, and they show the Flash's powers very effectively throughout the story. Great jumping on point for anyone who has never really read the Flash or knows anything about Wally West. I was howling with laughter at the way he got his powers, of course, at the end, because it's just that kind of coincidence can only happen in comics.
Yeah.
But really enjoyed it thoroughly. Good pick.
Yep.
Yeah, I did too. I don't think I've ever read this issue. I was surprised.
I had never read it until I keep saying Adam. I'm sorry. I don't mean to confuse the two of you gentlemen. Until Ian first suggested it, and I read it then, and I said all the things kind of that we're saying now, including, oh yeah, I need to pick up this run and just kind of go with it, and I haven't. And that's my fault. And it's something. It happens on this show all the time that we review a book, and one of the criteria that I have, if it's a book or a storyline that I'm not familiar with, is I say, well, does it make me want to read more? And a lot of times I say, absolutely, I want to read more, and then I don't, because there's just not enough time in the day to read everything, and something gets pushed aside, and you end up with a time bubble of books that you're not going to get to read. It's just that's the way life treats us, unfortunately. I agree with everything you said about Mark Waid's writing in here is tremendous. I think it's really, really well done, and it totally pulls you in, and it's decompressed, but it doesn't feel like a 2-minute read, which is big, because a lot of these decompressed stories, you read it in a couple of seconds and it's like I want more now. And this one didn't give me that. This felt like it was a complete story. The artwork is interesting to me because LaRocque's style, and he is very stylistic, it's not really my preferred style. I prefer like a little bit cleaner, a little bit more traditional. But I'm looking at it again from the review point of view, and I think the layouts are great. I think he really did a great job of making it dynamic and adding just things that make you want to follow the story from the way it's drawn. And not every artist is able to do that. So I give him a lot of credit for that. I just kind of wish his stylisticness was just a little bit more traditional with these same layouts. That's the only downside I can give on it. And it's a pretty minor downside because it's only to my taste as opposed to saying it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I love the layouts. The art, I think for the most part, everything through the entire issue is really good, but I don't like the way he draws faces. They look a little loose, not like you say, Paul, not quite as tight or as clean. It's not bad. It's just not what I prefer to see in my artwork. But I love the layouts and I love all the background, all the character references. I do think you're right, Ian. At times, Wally as a 10-year-old boy looks like an adult. I was thinking homunculus. Is that the right word for a miniature human?
Yes, it is.
So that flashed through my head.
There's relatively few artists that can do it well.
Yeah,
that's the reality. Is there's only been very, very rare instances where I've seen 10. I would say from 6 to 15. Very few artists have hit where you say that looks right.
It's like who can draw Darth Vader's helmet and who can't. Like most artists can't.
And like there's on page 20, when they're in the lab, there's a whole center 3-panel thing, and I think there he looks like a 10-year-old kid. Just other times, like even the panel right above it, he just looks like an adult looking at Barry in the Flash costume. But the stories,
which honestly, you pointing that out makes me wonder whether or not that's Jose Marzan's inks or whether that's LaRoque's initial pencils that may have done that as well. Because it's possible.
It's a great origin story. I'm pretty sure I'd really have to go back and search. I'm pretty sure I read the tail end of Mark Waid's run leading into Jeff Johns, right? That's who came immediately next was Johns.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure I read a good chunk of the last, I don't know, year or so of Mark Waid's run, but I never read any of this early stuff.
Yeah,
so it was a treat.
I had picked it up in trade years and years and years ago after I had read Dead Heat and I had read, the Return of Barry Allen and a couple of the other trades. And then eventually I wound up picking up the year one trade, which has most of this stuff in it. So this isn't my first run with this issue. But going back and reading it again just, proved to me outright, why this worked as well as it did. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, an era where a brand new take on a character, starting from scratch is issue 62 and not issue 1 of volume 3. So that's
or 4 or 5 or 6.
Yeah. Oh, for the
exactly.
May they come again.
Yep,
well, there's a weird dynamic to that because it's like back in the 60s, they thought it was better to have a high number on their stories. That's what that's why I think was it the Flash that picked up with its original numbering?
Yep.
From the Golden Age to the Silver Age.
Definitely.
Yes, it was.
Or they'd have a book that was one topic and they'd totally change it to something else, but they'd still keep the numbering going.
Mm-hmm. And the
they did that with Doctor Strange as well, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Doctor Strange went with the. Well, they did it with Doctor Strange, with the Hulk, and with Captain America when they took the split
and
books.
Journey didn't Journey in the Mystery do that as well? Eventually,
all the Marvel House titles. Yep, they switched over to the leading characters' books, but kept the numbering. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there was definitely a different thought process, and I think the thought process now is twofold. I think there's one, we're going to make them think this is going to be a collector's item by giving it a number 1, and I think that's the biggest overriding thing. And then I think on a lower level, I think they start to say to themselves, well, if we put it as number 1, people will feel it's a good jumping on point.
Yeah. And like you say, it goes along with that instant gratification that I think today's society is too comfortable with. Everything has to be right now, short, concise, quick reads. It's because nobody wants to be distracted with an actual hour-long read and look through a comic. They want 10 minutes so they can move on to something else.
Right.
And I think you're absolutely right. Number 1's reign supreme to give people what they think is a good jumping on point, even though it makes no sense to most of us and drives me crazy and actually turns me off of reading books long term because I get tired of the rebooting every time.
Sure.
And then even worse is the hypocrisy of rebooting it, and then 75 issues into the reboot, it's issue 500.
Yeah, or having an anniversary come up and say, "Well, this is number 13 in the series, but number 500 overall."
Yeah, exactly.
That's even worse to me. That's even worse to me when you do the reboot, you're on issue 6, and suddenly it's issue 600. Like, nah,
just
come
for that
on.
1 month for the anniversary.
Yeah. You can't have your cake and eat it too. One way or the other. Like stick with it. Stick with it.
But I once again am glad to have the app because I was able to peruse this easily on the DC app.
Yes, same here as well. Yep. All right. If we're going with ratings, so I mean, I guess to start off with the cover. I'm gonna give the cover a B+. The face on Wally, yet again, not the best, but I think the actual layout of it is great. With the lightning bolt, and I've always been a fan of that particular Flash logo, and the year 1 logo underneath it works really well. So I'll give it a solid B+. Artwork inside, I'm going to give it an A-, because for the most part it works for me outside of Old Man Face on 10-year-old. So I think that works. That works pretty well. Otherwise, story is a solid A, and overall, I'm giving this one an A. I think this is a great start to a historic run on the title.
I'll go next. I will give the cover a C+, just because I really don't like the way Wally's drawn. But I love the layout, the flash. I love the purple background, the lightning bolt, the year one. That's all great. I just, for being the main thing on the main focus on the cover, I just don't like Wally. So that for me is a C+. The art inside, solid B. Again, just because my personal taste, kind of like what Paul said, I don't like the loosey-goosey nature of the way he drew people, and especially the faces. But it everything else looks really great, and the layouts are great. Story, I agree, Ian. That's an A all the way. It's a great jumping on point, a great origin story that new readers of Wally get to read, and even me thinking I knew a lot about Wally because I read all of that Jeff Johns run of Wally, and I never knew some of this stuff that was incorporated in Mark Waid's run. So that was a treat. And I'm going to go with overall even an A, just because first issue of Mark Waid's run in Flash story was awesome. It was great.
Good, Murd.
Well, I must apologize, gentlemen, because I must abstain from either remarking on or grading either Ian's or Chris's selections because I own neither of them, and I don't do digital comics, as you know, so I have read neither. I do, however, have a copy of Shane's selection, so if we get around to that, I'll certainly have things to say about that. And may I say that this is a landmark for me because I think in all the appearances I've made on Back to the Bins, this is the first time I've actually read someone else's comics.
Murd, we're not curing cancer. We're not curing cancer on the show. It's all right.
So
I applaud you, Adam.
For me, it's NA across the board there.
For me, story's an A. I mean, it's a great introduction to the character. I really saw the character as a three-dimensional, kid, and just the way he interacted with the adult room was really well written, very realistic. Cover and interior art are like B's, but A overall because it's a really important book and it's a well-crafted book. And considering what Mark Waid becomes as a writer, how important he is in comics right through the present day, this is a landmark issue. Ian, great selection.
I'm going to say the cover doesn't really grab me. If I was not a Flash reader and I walked into the store, I don't think I'd look at this cover and say, oh, I need to pick up this issue. I don't think I'd realize how significant it's going to be from the cover. I almost feel like I would like to see this as kind of like an old-timey cover where you see the Flash holding a book in his hand and the book has this cover on it, that kind of thing, just to let you know like that where they're going with it. So conceptually it's not exactly what I would want, and the rendition of his face doesn't look right to me. So it's not a bad cover. It just doesn't. I don't feel it has the gravitas of what we get inside. So I'm going to say a C on the cover. Now, interior art is weird because, again, stylistically, it's not what I like. But as far as the execution goes, I think it's really, really well done. So I'm going to give it a B plus, despite my stylistic issues with it, because I just think the storytelling is excellent. And as with you guys, an A on the actual story itself, because it does everything it should do, and it makes you walk away from it very satisfied. So I'm going to give the book an A minus just for some minor detractions, but I'm going to give it an A minus because it is a significant book that is very well done.
And to comment real quick on artwork is that we if you do continue on with this, you get the first collaboration between Waid and Waringo later on in this Flash run, and Waringo to me that's the artist that I associate the most with Mark Waid's run on the Flash and
Fantastic Four for that matter.
Oh, and Fantastic Four, absolutely, and they work so well together as a team that's my pinnacle of Waid artwork right there, is when Waringo was side by side with him on the Wally West book.
God, Levinstein's sexy.
Ooh. I try, sir. I try.
Right, Shane, I think it's time for some Blue Beetle.
Oh, okay. Good heavens. Wait, I got to back up. I was ready for Marvel. Open.
But we already had Blue Beetle on this episode. What are you talking about? We get more Blue Beetle.
Now, before you
Blue
read this,
Beetle.
I'm gonna tell you. Well, before you give you a synopsis on this, I was reading it and I was thinking, did we already cover this book? It's weird. And you know what? It turns out I had to look back into the Back to the Bins archives a little bit. It was either issue 502 or 503. We reviewed the Secret Origins issue for Blue Beetle. So very, very similar, but not the
Kind of
same.
like the zero issue for this volume of Blue Beetle.
Right.
Yeah, kind
of.
That's funny.
All right. Well, first of all, I forgot just how much happens in this book as I was reading it.
Oh yeah.
I can't quite remember. I know my first introduction to Blue Beetle was through the Justice League book. And then I found out that Beetle and Booster had their own series. And then I was collecting back issues to get them and read them through. And I'm pretty sure, gosh, in CGS history, we read through Blue Beetle, I think in one of the, God, what are those black and white trades called that they came out with a few years ago?
DC Comics Presents?
Yeah.
No.
Showcase?
Yes.
Showcase.
Showcase.
Yep, that's right.
I think we covered Blue Beetle in a showcase once, but I could be misremembering that. So I've only read the first issue twice until now, which is the third time. And you start off with Ted as Blue Beetle going in to save the day while a fire is brewing in a building. And it's kind of typical, to me, typical Blue Beetle fanfare where he's dropping down from the bug, saving people, helping to fight the good fight, and finds out that this evil fire starter, Fire Fist, is in there causing it all.
Fire Fist!
The incendiary man!
What a name.
Battles him for a little while. And then you start, he kind of gets a little bit disillusioned from the firefighters. They're not really happy with him helping, which was kind of weird.
The Chief's ornery about it.
Yeah, he's a little bit unforgiving about it, which, all right, he just helped save you. And then you cut back to a different version of the bug, which I like a little bit better than the Charlton bug, but not as much as I like more modern bugs. So it's still better, but not quite what I like.
Still got the spindly limbs, but at least the head isn't articulated. It looks a little less like a frog as a result.
Yeah. I
prefer the bug. I prefer the bug to look more like the actual scarab. That's my favorite of the bug.
Yeah. And then you get into a bit of a history and origin. I had forgotten it was his uncle that he was kind of going after and causing some of this problems way back in the beginning. I appreciated, and again, I forgot this part too, where Ted takes what he finds from his uncle to Dan Garrett, his old professor, and they kind of talk and start working on resolving that issue, only to find out that Dan is the Blue Beetle with powers from the Scarab, which was awesome, and then gets mortally injured and makes Ted promise to take up the mantle. And then you get a great origin of Ted becoming Blue Beetle. You get to see Cord Industries and a lot of neat ancillary characters that come in, which I honestly can't remember how important they are to Ted's run as Blue Beetle in this first, 25, 26 issues that this first Blue Beetle run is. He goes to Star Labs and does some investigating there and some work with them. You find out Ted's father's best friend works for Cord Industries. His girlfriend, Melody is also at Cord Industries, which is kind of neat. I forgot about her. You get a page of Carapax, which I just kind of remembered from the Blue Beetle movie when I saw that this summer. So he's in there trying to search out stuff. Let's see. Then you get back to where Ted's in Star Labs and gets a buzz from a beeper, which is really the bug calling him because there's a trouble alert going on. So he goes off to try and save the day from what's happening there, only to come to find that it's the fire dude again, wreaking havoc.
This time he set fire to a fire company.
Yeah, and blows the roof right off of it towards the end, dropping them down into it and pinning Ted in the fire. And that's kind of how the issue ends, when Ted's kind of trapped and the fire, God, I forget his name, Firebrand is
Fire!
burn!
Firebrand's Marvel.
Fire Fist!
Fire Fist!
And that's really it, but it's a whole lot of stuff going on this first issue.
Yeah, it is.
The panel layouts are really good. The art's really nice for me. Of course, I'm going to be a little bit more biased because I love Blue Beetle. But it's a hell of a first issue, and it's, to a certain extent, it's a little bit too much in a first issue. Again, I read this after the fact of reading Beetle in Justice League for a while and seeing him in, like, I'm sure it was Millennium and some other crossover things before I ever read this issue of Blue Beetle. So I had already had a little bit of a foundation and a love of the character before going back to this, and then really finding out just how, to a certain extent, how much of a mess this story is, because I think they did put too much into this first issue to get
That's not possible.
Now, for me, I love it enough, but I'm reading it, 30, 40 years after loving the character. I don't know if I would have picked this issue up as a kid. I would have stuck with it without being introduced to him in the Justice League, because I really loved that iteration, the stories they told with him, and then discovered this kind of stuff.
Shane, let me start off the bat that all the examples you listed is why I loved reading this comic so much. I love when we do books from the 80s.
It's great.
Because it's a style of producing comics that just doesn't exist anymore. And you definitely can argue that sometimes they chock full too much in, but by the end of the book, what was it, 60 cents? Was that the cover price?
Yeah, 60 or 75.
Yeah. Full money's worth achieved.
Oh, sure.
You get great character development because, again, the styles changed. They used thought balloons back then. So you learn so much about Ted, his thinking about what he's going through as both as a businessman, a scientist, a superhero. Len Wein, of course, originally a Marvel writer. I think this book has a Marvel feel in that he introduces the whole supporting cast. You see all the other people in his life, like his receptionist and their fun dynamic and all that. And so this book, for me, was in many ways coming home. Just the writing style, the way the characters are established. His whole world is established by the end of the story, and I love how they brought the original Blue Beetle into it as well. I'm sure we'll talk about that to some degree.
That was fantastic.
It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And of course, there's Fire Fist. Anyway, sorry.
Fire Fist.
I totally agree. This was a lot of fun to read. And it again, another one that I read and thought, I'd like to read more of this. Whether I will or not, it remains to be seen. But I definitely thought that. Now, I happen to be prejudiced on the artwork for a different reason. A few years back at one of the local cons, we met Paris Cullins, and I think a nicer guy would be very, very difficult to find. He was such a good guy, and what a the happiest guy I think I've ever met. And I always have this thing where I always say it's more fun to appreciate art, whether it's music, drawings, any type of art, when you know it's coming from somebody who loves doing what they're doing, because it just kind of carries through. And I look at this artwork, not only is it a style that I really like, not only does it seem dynamic at moments, and it's got a very eclectic panel layout that I think is kind of cool towards the storytelling, but it comes from somebody who I know has got a huge grin on his face while he's drawing it. So when you add all of that together, I just love the art in this book. The story is engaging, and it made me want to read more. So I mean, thumbs up.
Quick piggyback, Paul, about the art. I'm sorry, I apologize. Just quickly, the page, and to piggyback at what Paul is saying about the art, the page where he and the firefighter escape from the collapsing building, and he's thinking about, okay, we can survive this if we stand right here, because then everything's going to fall around us. I thought that was really well rendered, and you really got a sense of the danger that was involved, and also just his skill in getting out of it. Sorry, Ian, go ahead.
No, please, by all means. The one piece of artwork that I was going to point out is that I happened to be reading this book while I was watching the Paramount Plus miniseries, The Offer, which is about the making of The Godfather.
Oh, I've seen that.
And
I have to watch that.
And Juno Temple was in that. And Juno Temple is on the screen, and on page 14, the bottom left panel, I swear to God, they draw Melody to look exactly like Juno Temple, even though this came out, 20 years before she was ever a thing. So it's just weird that, like, I'm reading this, I look up, there she is on the screen, and clearly, I know who should be playing Melody in whatever Blue Beetle property is to come, because she's the spitting image of it. It's fantastic. Also, the most 80s hair you could possibly have in a book
fantastic.
right here. In this Blue Beetle. I mean, Ted's like coif of reddish black hair is absolutely magnificent. The white leisure suit that he's wearing is straight Miami Vice. You can't get better than that. And this book gave me a greater appreciation, not that I didn't already enjoy it, but a greater appreciation for the Blue Beetle movie.
Yes,
because so many elements from this wind up in the Blue Beetle movie. Whether it be Ted's uncle, which is recast as an aunt, this time around. Victoria, thank you. So many of the other elements of this wind up in that movie. So now I'm super happy that I've read this and understand where it came from.
Even me reading it a few times, like I said, 2-3 times now, I didn't realize just how much of issue 1 was in the movie. I was kind of blown away by that too. Something I did like about this version of Blue Beetle, and I say that because I love the Justice League that came out at this time in 87. But it is goofy, it is campy. Ted is the butt of a joke. He makes jokes. In this, he is highly intelligent, driven, courageous, adventurous. And not that he's not those things in Justice League, but this to me is a different take. And I know this came out before Justice League, but this is definitely a different take on Ted Kord as Blue Beetle at this point. Not nearly as goofy as what he becomes later. And again, the goofy's not a bad thing. I love that shtick, especially when it's Booster and Beetle going at it as a comedy duo. I love it. But this is really something different.
Talk about the aesthetic of, what Chris brought up, Len Wein having that Marvel aesthetic. I had a feel of this era's Iron Man. In the actual style of the book.
Good point.
Whether it comes to the machining aspect of the supporting cast, like a lot of it felt very that era Tony Stark Iron Man to me, in a very positive way. But clearly we know where Len Wein's roots come from, and it shows in this particular book.
And even Ted talking a little bit in the issue about still becoming the hero, even though he can't get the Scarab to do, or without the Scarab's powers that it gave Dan, or some kind of comment he makes in one of the panels like that. I just thought it was enjoyable. I just don't know if when I was a kid, if I would have picked this up first, if I would have stuck with it.
You wouldn't have picked up for Fire Fist.
No.
Murdough fourth.
I was going to say, I have a feeling you love Fire Fist, but that's...
It's a memorable name, but let's not forget it's Fire Fist, the Incendiary Man.
That's right. There you go. Thank you.
Subtitle included. Just that additional adjective, just going the extra mile there on Len Wein's part. Yeah. I agree with just about everything that's been said. Len Wein does bring kind of a Marvel feel to this. It's kind of throwing together some of the coolest elements of like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Batman into a single character. I love Paris Cullen's artwork. He most of his major publishing career took place at DC. He did like odd jobs on various DC titles in the early 80s. His first major series assignment was the Blue Devil series. It came out from DC a couple of years prior to this, which is a great favorite of mine. It's one of the first series of which I collected a complete run in my early days as a collector. Wow. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone who just wants a really fun DC Universe grounded 80s series. It has a number of aspects in common with this series, actually. And it is his artwork here. And I'm very happy to hear Paul report that Paris is a very nice guy and who appears to really enjoy what he does, because I can easily believe just looking at his artwork here, which is so it's splashy, it's animated, it's plastic, it bespeaks fun, and it really looks like it was drawn by somebody who did have a smile on his face as he was committing all these lines to paper. And it's good that although this is well-rendered, solid superhero storytelling, it doesn't stray into like full-on blah-ha-ha self-satire.
Yeah.
It has a definite sense of humor, a la, say, The Web Slinger. And it's a well-rendered supporting cast, which, as Ian mentions, it's pretty much in sync with what Iron Man's supporting cast was at the same time. There's a good amount of foreshadowing going on with Detective Fisher, again, who we saw was a part of Ted's Silver Age supporting cast, suspecting Ted of foul play in the disappearance of Dan Garrett. And there's a little bit of foreshadowing at the Star Labs laboratory of Ted's friend Murray Takamoto, where there's a mysterious janitor who's clearly got.
I forgot about that. I didn't mention that.
Yes, he's cooking something up, and he's disappointed. He's going to make sure that Ted doesn't spoil it for him. I agree with Ian that I love like the GQ fashion design for Ted Kord, like the sweater vest and the newsboy cap. It's just it screams maverick 80s tech startup entrepreneur. And it feels like something I don't know, Weird Science or Misfits of Science or something like that. It's like what if I don't know, Steve Jobs we're about to fight crime. And it's on the art level, on the story level. It's Shane said there's a lot going on in this issue. There's not a trace of decompression in sight.
No.
And as far as the tying in of I do feel I need to throw this in here, though. The origin of Ted and the trip to Pago Island and confrontation with his uncle. That's a lot of that was actually lifted almost unaltered from his Silver Age origin, as originally crafted by Ditko. So we got to give credit to that as far as the transfer to the movie. Ted discovering his uncle's malign intentions, and the first thing he thinks is, "Oh no, my uncle's building a world-conquering robot army. I'm going to go tell my college archaeology professor about this." Instead of going to the authorities, or maybe somebody who taught him robotics in college, instead he goes to the archaeology professor, just so we can get Dan Garrett, as he was originally conceived in the previous volume of Charlton's Blue Beetle series, in which Dan Garrett was the main character and he was an archaeologist. They kind of were stuck with that when they were crafting Ted Kord's Silver Age origin, and that's just a bit of Silver Age illogic that they lifted unscrutinized and transferred into the 80s. So it's just kind of in passing. The Carapax part was not a part of his Silver Age origin, though. Carapax does take his origin from this very issue. Mm-hmm. So, there is a lot to love about this first issue, and I collected a full run of Blue Beetle almost on a whim just a couple of years back.
Oh wow!
I thought to myself, I should read the '80s Blue Beetle series by Len Wein and Paris Cullens. I've heard some good stuff about it. One convention and one wild pig sale later, I had collected the entire run, which, as you said, Shane, is just like 2 years worth of comics, like 25 issues and change, and I'd paid no more than 50 cents an issue. So any of you listening here, if you don't have like a DC Infinite account and are interested in gathering this up in paper form, you shouldn't have too much difficulty doing it. It's affordable and it's well worth whatever you paid for it.
Sadly, there's no wild pig for them to get it from, though.
I'm actually disappointed in that DC a couple years ago produced 2 volumes of Booster Gold's 80s series, and it encompassed all issues in those 2 volumes. Yet they haven't done it for Blue Beetle, and I really thought they would have, because boy, to have 4 individual volumes encompass both series that are both 24, 25 issues long, I don't know why they wouldn't, especially with the Beetle movie coming out. I know it was different, but man, that would have been perfect. I'm amazed it's not out.
They definitely focused more on the Jaime Reyes Beetle the past couple of years, even on the collection side of things. Like, the fact that Jaime Reyes's initial run was out of print for a while. This is why I will never understand trade paperbacks at companies like Marvel and DC, how seminal books can go out of print for so long, and sometimes even be out of print after a movie has come out until like a month or 2 after its run, where suddenly it's back in print. Like, you couldn't have had the foresight to put that back into print to have people be interested in your property and be able to read it easily. Sure, you could do it on the app pretty easily, or you could do it online, but a physical copy of the 80s Beetle stuff would have made a lot of sense to come out with the movie. I agree.
And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy Jaime Reyes as well as Blue Beetle. I think it's a great character.
Yeah. But there's more than one Blue Beetle, plain and simple. Yep.
All right, ready? Time for ratings?
Sure.
Yeah.
I give the cover an A+. There's almost no more dynamic, fantastic cover that I could think of, especially featuring just one character. In what is a quintessential pose that almost everybody tries to interpret in some way if they're drawing Blue Beetle. Interior art, I'm giving that an A because I think it's great. The layouts are great. It's dynamic. It doesn't look terribly off to me at all. It like everyone said, it looks very 80s, and I love it. Story is an A for me as well. Just a great origin story. You get a lot of groundwork here for things that come later in the series, and stick with Blue Beetle in many iterations down the road. So for me, again, a little bit biased, but even just going with this criteria, it is really overall an A book for me.
I am going to pretty much agree with you. Sometimes I take points off the cover if it's a poster image as opposed to giving us kind of some insight into what is inside. And this is kind of a poster image, but it's a #1 issue. And I usually am much more forgiving on #1 issues when they do that to us. Mm-hmm. This looks exciting from the cover. And again, as a younger collector, I think I would see this on the newsstand and say, I need to pick this up. And that is by far my biggest criteria. Does it make you want to pick up the issue? I think this one does. The interior art, maybe I am prejudiced because I like Paris Cullen so much, but yeah, and it's an absolute A for me as far as I'm concerned. And the story was, it pretty much pulled me in. I enjoyed reading it, and again, you said there's a lot in there. I see that as a plus. If it's if it's got a little meat to it, and you got to pay attention, and maybe you can't multitask as you're reading it, that's a good thing. Maybe it's not designed to get the more casual reader involved, but certainly somebody who loves comic books should be picking this up and saying this is terrific. So I'm going to give it an A all around.
Okay. I think I'll give it an A- on the cover. I'm a fan of the cover, and I'm a fan of the posing. The red sky and the particular red that they chose and how unnatural it is. While I understand that it poses the character well and it goes good against the blueness of everything else. I feel like they could have chosen a little bit of a different color red for that in order to be 100% perfect for me. So I'll give it an A-. Same on the artwork. The artwork is getting an A- for me. I love the overall great posing, terrific faces. Again, I'm going to have to go with the skies. There's a lot of empty space with the skies, and it might just be the style of the artwork. It might just be the decision making of the colorist, but a lot of just straight up yellow skies or pink skies or red skies when there could be more detail in there than what we have. But the rest of the artwork sings, no question about it. So just a slight ding that'll give me in the A- territory. Story, I'm giving an A, and overall, I'll give it an A-. I think this is a very, very solid first issue for a character, no question about it.
A's across the board for me. I thought it was an exceptional first issue.
I am very much simpatico with Ian's assessment of the cover. I'm going to give it an A- as well. I also was bothered by the tomato orange cover. I mean, I understand that it's a complementary color to blue, so they couldn't make it a blue sky with Blue Beetle in the foreground. But even so, it's weird, unless it's like 1970s Gotham, where the sky seemed to be orange a lot of the time. Yeah, it's a good perspective. You get kind of the man on the street's view of the Beetle swinging down from the bug on his sky wire, but I think the Beetle could have been a little bit larger on the cover to really have the desired impact. And also the blurb at the bottom: "Watch out, world! The Beetle is back, and Adventure-dom will never be the same." I don't believe that Adventure-dom is a word. So
it is now.
It's on the cover.
That is Adventure-dom,
but it's not the same.
So yeah, it's a cool cover, but not cool enough. I give it an A-. The Paris Collins artwork, I love Paris Collins. I give that an A. The story, an A, and I give it an overall A.
I actually think with the cover, if they were going to improve on it at all and still want to keep that redness to it, given what the beginning of the story is and the end of the story, if they would have just put a little bit more orange and maybe some flaming around it, it would have also lent itself right into the beginning of the story and the end of the story, and it would have made perfect sense.
And it would have taken away my one criticism of the cover.
Right.
All right.
So, Chris, you brought an often forgotten, little-known story.
Yeah, and the one Marvel book out of all of us.
So, Paul's sarcasm is well placed. I chose Daredevil 181 from 1982, which I'm sure many listeners are familiar with because it's. I don't think this is probably one of the most important comic books of the 1980s.
I didn't realize it, and when I looked at it and I saw double-sized issue, I went, "Oh God."
It's going to take me longer to read this.
Yeah. Oh.
So
we could easily do an entire episode of the show just on this book.
Absolutely.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Easily.
So this is the death of Elektra. Well, the initial death. Well, the first death of Elektra, or
it is the first one.
Yeah. So
the premiere death of Elektra?
One of many deaths of Elektra. That's what it is.
So
she hasn't died as many times as Jean Grey has.
No,
that's true. That's
so
true. Yeah,
but
yeah,
I chose this for a couple of reasons. I don't think we've ever we did a Daredevil spotlights on the show several years ago, so I'm sure we talked about it then. But this is a book that is so important to me that I was looking forward in this format to talk about a little more detail. So it's Frank Miller, story and pencil. This is his legendary initial run on Daredevil, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. This is near the end of that run, actually. Inks and colors, and frankly, should get the lion's share of credit for the art is Klaus Janson. Joe Rosen letters, Denny O'Neil is editing, and this is during the Shooter era as editor-in-chief. So I'll just do a quick summary because I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the story, but basically this is the culmination of a long-running storyline where the Kingpin was trying to insert his proxy as a candidate for mayor in New York City. So he's hoping that his candidate would then win, and then he could then basically seize control of the city politically through his cat's paw, who's going to be in the mayor's office. Daredevil foils this campaign, and at the end of that storyline, which is in issue 180, Kingpin makes it clear that, since his plan has been foiled, that there has to be retaliation. But he decides that, he can't go after J. Jonah Jameson because he's too much of a public figure, and he decides that we're going to have Franklin Nelson assassinated. And through these stories, back in issue 168, we have the character of Elektra Natchios introduced, who is this virtually supernatural assassin. Later, of course, find out that she has a background as a ninja. And, of course, we know from early stories that she and Matt Murdock were young lovers in college. And basically, the whole run has been about Matt struggling with the fact that basically this great adversary of his, who was working for an even greater adversary, the Kingpin, is his long-lost love. And obviously, Miller brings in many of his crime noir influences into these stories. And anyone who hasn't read his first run on Daredevil, it's some of the most exciting comics of the early 1980s. And I highly recommend them. They introduce the hand, all those supernatural elements into Daredevil, his ninja background, stick, all of that. But this book, of course, is then the culmination of Elektra decides when she actually abducts Foggy, who recognizes her, and she can't go through with it. And the framing device of the whole story is that Bullseye, who we all know is a perennial Daredevil foe from back in the Bronze Age, who Miller takes to a terrifying new level once he gets his hands on the character. I'm thinking back to an earlier issue where in the cover he is strutting on the Black Widow with a hairdryer wire. So the Bullseye's in prison, and he narrates it's all from his perspective. And it's him obsessed with wanting to break out and get his revenge on Daredevil, who has beaten him numerous times in all stories that have been published prior to this. And in the course of that, he realizes that Daredevil and Matt Murdock are one of the same. And he's figured this out. And the Kingpin has replaced him with Elektra as his chief assassin, which in Bullseye's pride as a hitman is affected by that. He wants to regain his stature. The Kingpin thinks his theory, and this is ironic, it's what happens there on board again. The Kingpin thinks Bullseye's theory is cracked. He doesn't believe him. And then Bullseye's then determined to prove himself to both the Kingpin and to show that his theory is actually correct. When Elektra frees Franklin, and she has this moment of consciousness, and she lets him go, and Bullseye then confronts her in probably one of the most dynamic hand-to-hand combat scenes ever put to page, in my opinion, in a comic book, especially in 1982. And this is a very famous or infamous scene where Bullseye ultimately doesn't just defeat Elektra, he brutally murders her. Yeah. And she then it's cinematic. She's dying. I mean, he spears her on her own side. It's a very famous panel. And then she drags herself to Matt's brownstone, where he comes out as Matt Murdock, and she dies in his arms with Bullseye watching incognito. And then, of course, Bullseye then is determined to then fight Daredevil. He's convinced Daredevil is Matt Murdock. He goes to Murdock's brownstone. Matt uses a subterfuge and to make Bullseye think that they're still two different people. They engage in a climactic battle, which, again, the artwork is just tremendous. The use of shadow, again, Miller's crime noir influences are heavily on display here, and also Japanese art as well. And Daredevil not only defeats Bullseye, he lets him drop, and Bullseye is then his whole body is shattered, and he ends up, and the story ends with his narration again, incomplete traction, paralyzed, but still plotting his revenge, and also reflecting the fact that, I didn't get Daredevil, but at least I got Murdock. And then, of course, the classic final images of Matt in the snow at Elektra's very imposing gravestone. And that's how the story ends. And so in 1982, I was 9 years old. Yeah, and my parents would often take me to indoor flea markets. And I remember I didn't get this on the stands. Maybe it was a little bit later. Maybe I was 10 or 11. I was still very young. And they bought this book for me. And it blew off the top of my head. Because, I've been reading comics for several years then as a kid, right? And I had never seen violence portrayed in a comic book the way it was portrayed in this book. From the opening splash page where Bullseye is fantasizing about shooting Daredevil in the head, all the way through, as a comic book reader, I was not the same kid at the end of this book. And I mean this in the best possible way, because this book opened my eyes. I didn't have the vocabulary, the wherewithal yet to fully express what I was experiencing. But the way this book was drawn, the extremely adult subject matter, the depiction of violence in it, I'd never seen this in a comic book before. Because I hadn't read any of other Miller's Daredevil stories before this. I'd read like Son of Orange. I'd read the classic Brother Take My Hand, which I think we talked about in this show, actually, Paul.
Yes, we did.
The beautiful Gene Colan story from the 60s that Stan Lee wrote. So I had some familiarity with Daredevil. I didn't know anything about Elektra or Bullseye or anything like that. And this was a transformative book for me personally as a reader and as a lover of the medium. And I also think in terms of comics of the 80s, this is an enormously important comic book. And I think it's the culmination of what Miller and Klaus Janson, I think, deserves a massive amount of credit for the art in this book. It's a landmark moment. And two things I just want to point out before I turn it over to you, gentlemen. But I think just are demonstrations of what a master class this comic is. So I'm going to hold up to the screen. Her face when Foggy recognizes her. The art is so beautiful, like the look in her eyes. It's Miller and Janson just working amazing symbiosis here. And then, of course, the next page, this sequence of panels. So before this in comics, I was used to heroes like punching villains and like pow, bam, sock, and, stuff that wouldn't actually happen in real life. This is martial arts. This is like a panel by panel, blow by blow of two master combatants trying to kill each other. And you know that Miller, I'm sure Miller studied martial arts. He must have to. I mean, I don't know a lot about martial arts, but I know enough to know that he's basing this on actual moves that someone would make in a street fight, essentially. It's absolutely breathtaking. This is a transformative book for me. And just the cinematic ending, where the way she dies, and also one other thing I wanted to point out, when he goes into Murdaugh's apartment at the end, his brownstone, look at the way Miller uses light and shadow and Jansen in these panels, and the masks on the wall. Look, when I was reading a lot of comics in the 80s growing up, most comics were comics. Then there was stuff like this. This is on a whole nother level for me. I love G.I. Joe. I was reading as a kid. That's a fun book. This is something else. So that's my initial thoughts.
What I truly appreciate about this book, and I'm not always the biggest Frank Miller fan. There's a specific era of Frank Miller that I'm a fan of. This is that era where he was a little bit more grounded, a little less completely out there, and basically what I've always thought about Frank Miller is that as long as he has a co-collaborator, his stuff tends to be a favorite of mine. Klaus Janson was clearly his co-collaborator on this wholeheartedly. You could tell by the artwork, you could tell by the style. It's the two of them working together perfectly as a team. And the narration in this is tried and true Frank Miller narration. Like if you were to stick the early narration of this into a Sin City book, it would still work. Yeah. Because that's the era of Frank Miller that we're working with here. You know, you've got to suffer first. Oh yeah. I'll break every bone in your body, grind your spine into powder, make every nerve you've got scream in agony, make you pay. And just pages and pages of narration boxes for Bullseye to perfect effect. And because this is the era that it's in, today we would say Bullseye had post-concussion syndrome. Because that's probably exactly what he had. You know, the constant headaches, the ringing in his ears, like that's post-concussion syndrome, plain and true. You know, the fact that there are football players that deal with it today, boxers, wrestlers, you name it. And really, like he's not in his own mind. He is, but he isn't, because of what's happened to him. You know, Matt was just being, you know, Daredevil and trying to save people when it went down, but clearly Bullseye is not even anywhere near in his full capacities because of these constant headaches that he's been having. He uses it to get out of the prison as well, and then, you know, break free and, you know, go through what he's done. But it's incredibly well crafted here in an era where it wasn't even well studied. That's what's so fascinating to me about that. Whether he intended it to be or not, that I'm looking at it, you know, in today's eyes, but that's clearly what I'm getting from it. The other part of it that I appreciate is the lack of words when words simply would not do. You know, how much of the back of this book are just effects, like Chris pointed out, you know, the sounds of the moves and what have you, because narration at that point wouldn't have done anything. It's a fight scene, and it needed to be a fight scene, and it's illustrated perfectly and executed perfectly. This book is probably one of my favorite Frank Miller books, bar none, for many reasons. And it's on display throughout this issue. It's masterful storytelling. It really is.
You know, Ian, you made a good point about the headaches. On the other side of that, I think, especially if you've read the previous issues, Elektra also is not at the top of her game because she doesn't want to do it anymore. And she's clearly like deflated. And in fact, that Miller did I think it was called the Elektra Saga, where they reintroduce these stories again, like in like a series of reprints, but he changes the narration in this scene in the battle, and now it's Elektra thinking about it.
Huh.
And when you read that, I remember this now. When you read her narration, her heart's not in it. I mean, Bullseye was lethal to begin with, but neither one of them are really top flight. And I think it explains to some degree why ultimately he's able to kill her, because she's just done. So that's a great point you made, Ian. Great point.
See, I've seen things where they talk about, head injuries and everything, and it's almost where the headache from a concussion makes somebody I'm saying it wrong because I'm going to say more focused, but almost more driven. And I could see that as kind of the thing, because he's obsessed here. There's no question he's obsessed with Daredevil, and he's taking that to a whole new level. You mentioned, Ian, that the words are there. They wouldn't have added anything. If anything, the words would have detracted, because the words would have been distracting when you didn't need them there to explain it to you. The pictures were giving you everything you needed, and the word that Chris used a couple of times, which is what comes to mind to me every time I look at Miller when Miller was at his best, is cinematic. This issue could easily be a full-length movie.
Well, they tried that, and it did not work out very well.
Well, no, forget that crap.
They even used some of the dialogue from this comic book, actually.
But if you see the third season of Daredevil on Netflix, which focused on Bullseye, there is a lot of influence in that from this, and that was I enjoyed that very much.
Bullseye is pretty terrifying in that season.
Yes. I mean, by far, of the TV series that Marvel has had, the different series, the 3 seasons of Daredevil, I think, top everything else that they've done, that they did. And
one thing I would say, Paul, without spoiling for those, because I know Shane at least hasn't seen, and maybe Mert hasn't either, in that 3rd season, just remember the scene where he goes into the newsroom. You know what I'm talking about, Paul?
I think I do.
And like he's going after like the people in the newsroom. Wow. Like they don't pull any punches.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely adult only. And just for the level of intensity that's in there. But so well done, and definitely very, very Frank Miller influenced. The art in this, it's funny, Frank Miller, when he's at the top of his game, and I agree that he is at the top of his game much more so when he had Klaus Janson inking him than when he'd ink himself or have somebody else inking him. But when he's at the top of his game, I think his artwork is just tremendous, even though, and this kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, even though he doesn't really have the style that would be my preferred style, I love his artwork, which is kind of weird. But he kind of, we talked earlier about Ditko, and I mentioned Ditko in the Spider-Man era, how he would have some kind of like a film noir feeling to it with the shadows and everything. And I can almost see the influence that Ditko had on either Jansen, whoever did it, just based on the shadows that are in this. I can't give this high enough grades. They don't make the grades any higher than A+, and I feel like that's what I'm jumping ahead to rating, but I feel like every single aspect of this book is an A+. It's just I think it's one of the best comic books ever.
Now,
and I don't mean that to be just giving false praise. I mean, absolutely, this is just one of the best books.
I knew of this book's significance, but I've never read it until this today.
Terrific.
My first exposure to Frank Miller was The Dark Knight Returns, and I read it because it was Batman, but I at first couldn't stand the art at all. And I know that's completely different than what we're looking at here. But then to read this and knowing its significance, but reading it, I cannot imagine almost a more perfect book than this from start to finish, from the cover to the story, to the content, the art, the colors, the layouts, the dialogue, the lack of dialogue, as so many have said before, that is appropriate. It really is cinematic, as Chris and Paul both said. It is almost perfection. It really is perfection. I can't think of anything wrong with this book. And I'm thrilled to have read it now.
And what I need to do after this is go back into the Marvel Unlimited app and read issue 35 of What If. What if Elektra?
That's a great what if.
What if Elektra had
Great
lived?
what if. Yep.
Yeah, I had a physical copy of it at one point. I don't know if I still do, but Frank Miller actually was the man behind that issue.
Yep.
Wow.
along with inks by Terry Austin, and it tells
not bad either.
It tells a very different take on what could have happened had Elektra survived this encounter with Bullseye, and what would have happened next for Daredevil and her. So nice companion piece to this issue.
We have to remember also that the Daredevil character before Miller had a really, really interesting and kind of polyglot existence. Like you've got like the early, Lee stuff with like Gene Colan, and then you get into the really funky, trippy 70s Daredevil with like Steve Gerber's writing it, and like remember like Moondragon shows up and he has all these wacky villains he's fighting, and it's really fun. Like I really enjoy it. Like Karen
Angar the Screamer.
Yes, Angar the Screamer. I mean,
Ramrod.
Ramrod,
Necra and Mandrill and all those.
That was when I first started reading it. I loved those issues.
So they're really fun, and the character of Matt Murdock is well established. When you get into the Miller period, though, especially when he takes over the writing from Roger McKenzie, he really starts to explore, Daredevil's roots in terms of the ninja aspect. And he really brings in the street level and the crime noir elements, which he clearly are heavily influencing his approach to this character. And basically, when people think about, Daredevil and who love Daredevil and why he's such an impactful character, they're really thinking about this era of the character. That's what fully informs the Netflix series completely. In fact, when Daredevil appeared in She-Hulk, what was fun about that was that was kind of more of a tribute to the older Daredevil that was a little more swashbuckling and more sort of fun. This is like, after these issues, by the way, Matt Murdock basically loses his mind. Like, you keep reading, like there's a great issue, Miller's last issue of the book before he comes back for Born Again. All I'll say is Daredevil goes to Bullseye's hospital room with a gun. And I'll leave it there. You have to read it. But, this is heavy. Like, it's very intense because he's also exploring like the idea of obsession. Bullseye in this issue, but also Matt Murdock later on when it comes to his dynamic with Elektra. So I'm really glad everybody, Shane, I didn't know you never read this before, so I'm really glad it
never read it.
had an impact on you. But
this was my first time on it as well, Chris.
Really?
Wow. There's big holes in my Daredevil reading, and I've read a few of Frank Miller's issues over the years, but even though I've seen that one scene every like 849
everybody's
times.
seen that, yeah.
Exactly, the dye through the side through Elektra's stomach like that. But I've never read it up until now, and it was a great joy that I finally got to it because now I completely understand why this is a seminal work.
And when you think
the biggest problem,
go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry. No, please go.
I was going to say the biggest problem with Miller's work on Daredevil is the same problem as his work on The Dark Knight, is that too many people tried to copy what he did after he did it and didn't do it as well as him.
Of course not.
And it actually took, and again, another thing, we're kind of bringing full circle to something we've talked about already. I think it took Mark Waid writing the character to kind of revive him and change him, to say, I'm not going to write him as the film noir character. I'm going to write him as a fun character again.
Although I would say before that, probably the two writers who got the closest to that.
Bendis.
Yeah, exactly. Both
and
Bendis and did terrific runs on the character.
Ed Brubaker.
Brubaker.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both of them back to back essentially did a great job,
and those are great runs.
Oh yeah, and Kevin Smith though was clearly aping Frank Miller, even though that's a good story.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what you're talking about, Paul. That he was trying to be Frank Miller essentially with that story, and it was good. Oh yeah,
but it wasn't.
It's
great.
just not. It's not Frank Miller. Exactly. Yeah.
And one thing I want to remind people is that because we're so oversaturated with
obviously depictions of violence in comics. So, like as Ian mentioned, when he impales her, he also lifts her up.
Yeah.
And she's like dangling from the knife, and it's really brutal. And like outside of like independent stuff, like maybe like Grendel and Komiko, you didn't see stuff like that in comics in the 1980s. Like not in mainstream stuff, not to this level. And I applaud Shooter and whoever for giving him the freedom to tell this story. Like I'm looking again at when she and Bullseye are fighting. Like at one point, like there's a thought to every panel. Like he grabs her hair and he uses it to pull her chin into his knee, basically. So like they really put thought into how they choreographed their battle. And like you guys said, and I've said, like you were watching a really this is storyboards, like a really well directed film.
Yeah. One of the sequences.
I was just going to say Denny O'Neil.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just Denny O'Neil was the editor, and that says a lot, right?
Yeah.
So.
One of the sequences that I really, really enjoyed for the cinematic storyboard feel was when Bullseye tests Murdough to see if he's Daredevil.
That's great.
And he throws the scalpel at him.
Yep.
And Daredevil and Murdough just lifts his billy club to catch the scalpel. It's just an amazing sequence. I think this whole book.
And also pay attention to detail. So like when they're in the courtroom and you see Matt in like classic Matt Murdock lawyer mode, like he's just got this fantastic closing argument, and Bullseye's watching, and then if you notice in the background, Elektra's there too, in her taxi cab driver masquerade. Like she's standing behind Bullseye. She doesn't know it's Bullseye, and she's got the cap on. It's clearly her. So
okay, I see that.
It's a nice touch because she's stalking Foggy. But you imagine she's probably also like watching her long lost love do his thing. And this is great Foggy, by the way. Like when she's captures him in the cab, the look of complete terror on his face. His eyes are like wide as saucers. He's begging. It's great Foggy Nelson. Just his character. I love this story. I have a signed lithograph of the cover by Miller and Klaus Johnson in my office.
Nice.
I'll shut up.
Like I said, we could easily do an entire show just on this book, and anybody. I would recommend you pick up. I really enjoy the character of Daredevil, even through some schizophrenic runs where the character got a little weird over the years. But if you find what we're talking about here to be interesting, I would recommend you pick it up from the Mackenzie Miller era and read forward.
That's issue 158 with the Deathstalker, I think was the character.
Yes. Yeah. Who was another very interesting character, but they kind of did away with him.
He was a big Daredevil adversary in the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the contrast is interesting, Chris, that you picked this up at 9 years old, and being about 10 years older than you, I picked it up at 19 years old, and we had similar experiences with it, just the same.
You could probably articulate your reaction a bit better at 19 than I could at 9, Paul. But one last question, gentlemen. What do we think of Colin Farrell as Bullseye in that movie?
Oh, God.
At the time it was okay, but
after
you think about
this,
it later, it's just not.
The worst part is that it's not the actor that's the failing.
Not at all.
Because
not at all.
It's the script and the directing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Colin Farrell have actually given material to work with, as he has proven time and again. Yeah. He could have knocked it out of the park, but that was not to be the case.
And whoever's decision it was to tattoo an imprint of a bullseye on his forehead.
That was when they did a mini series and they did that.
That's right.
Well,
actually it was like cut into his head.
Well, cut it.
But I'm pretty sure the miniseries happened because they were doing it in the movie. So that's why they made the change in the comics. It's like when all of a sudden the X-Men were wearing the leather uniforms from the movie. It's like one has to copy the other every single time.
And again, what I would say, just again without spoiling for some of our friends who have not seen it, the way they do Bullseye in the Daredevil Netflix is tremendous. It's really well done.
I have to also check with my oldest boy, Ben, to see if he watched it. He was going through all the Marvel stuff from Netflix at one point, I want to say during the pandemic maybe. I don't know if he ever finished it out, and he might have, because there's things that he's watched that I haven't through that whole Marvel run, because I
think
still stuck way back in the beginning.
I think by far the best things of that Netflix Marvel run were the 3 seasons of Daredevil, the first season of Jessica Jones.
I love
that
Jones.
season.
Oh, so good.
God, David
and
Tennant, oh my God,
and
I
surprisingly, because I'm against the grain on this, because a lot of people disagreed with me, but I think once we got to episode 3 of the first season of Luke Cage, I really enjoyed
I loved
the
Luke
run.
Cage. I thought Luke Cage was awesome.
Yeah.
that's where I'm stuck
was
at.
awesome.
I think
thought
I'm
the
stuck on
first
episode 2.
I thought
Nightmares,
the first 2
come on.
episodes was slow, and then the third episode, if I remember right, was when they did his origin. And from that point forward, I really enjoyed that first season.
God, I got to block time
And
and finish that whole thing off.
I will point out real quick before we end it here is that those series, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, and the Defenders, are now all officially on the MCU timeline. They exist within MCU. They're no longer a side project that may or may not be referenced.
That was actually announced, Ian?
Yes, as of the release of Echo earlier this week, they're now.
I think it was officially once they had the ownership and could put it on Disney Plus.
Well, that's a yes and no though, because they had it on Disney Plus, but they had it as a separate entry. They weren't officially on the MCU timeline until this.
So that means
week.
the Punisher then is on the timeline as well, then.
Which was also a
Correct.
good series,
Yes, it
or a
was.
good season.
Well, John Bernthal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Well, the
let's do our-
season, just to finish it, season 2 of Daredevil has Daredevil and John Bernthal as the Punisher,
Yes,
Yeah.
which is
right.
pretty
Yes.
awesome as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I'm going to jump ahead of you on this, Chris, because I already said A+ is all around. I can't give any criticism at all to this. Now
Same
you
for
can
me.
go.
Same for A+ across the board.
I agree.
A+. Yeah, A+. Yep.
Adam, if I can recommend to you that you pick this up in some form and read it, I can't recommend it highly enough.
So I've heard, but Miller. I agree with Ian. Early grounded Miller is better than later
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
high on his own fumes Miller. But yeah, it's not something I'll avoid reading, but it's certainly not something I'm going to go out of my way to read. I don't necessarily want to read a comic about somebody getting impaled on her own sigh.
Fair enough.
It serves the story, Murd. It serves the story.
All right, so that all said, I'm going to say thank you guys so much. I always have a great time when you come on.
Oh, thanks for having us.
And
You bet.
I couldn't appreciate it more. I really couldn't.
We're
So
always happy to do it.
Yeah, we appreciate that you invite us.
Yeah.
I'll do what I usually do, and I'll let a little time pass, and I'll invite you again, and we'll try and see when we can squeeze it in. But that said, I'm throwing out to the 4 of you right now. Every single one of you, separate or together, have an open invitation. If you have an inkling where you say, "Hey, I want to come on," you're on.
Oh,
Honored,
that'd be great.
100%.
Honored.
Yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
I'm happy to have finally had all 4 of us in one back to the bins.
Right.
It's always been like some collection of us, one way or the other. So
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
the cats have been herded.
This has been great, and thanks again. And
happy to be on here, man.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I bid you a fond farewell, and we'll talk soon.
all right, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you, Paul. Good night, everybody.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you once again to Paul Spataro for having us all on. I know this came out a while ago, so you may have heard it before if you're already subscribed to Back to the Bins. If you are not subscribed to Back to the Bins, head to twotruefreaks.com to get your subscription rolling. It's also available anywhere you find podcasts, so do make sure to check that out. But Paul Spataro is a gentleman and a scholar when it comes to both comic books and movies, and I love being on, and I hope that I will be on again sometime in the not too distant future, whether just myself or with my podcast brethren in one form or another. But yeah, Paul's a great guy, and hope you guys enjoyed this episode. To start us off, we wanted to make sure that you had content for 2025 in this first week, and what better way to do it than here with this syndicated episode. Email address for Comic Timing is comictiming@gmail.com. Facebook.com/Comic Timing is where you can find our Facebook stuff. And you can also find the Comic Timing Facebook group there as well. which is thriving, and we hope it continues to thrive in the new year as well. Plenty of great posts and content in there, and it's the easiest way to get in touch with me or any of the Comic Timing crew. You can find us over on Bluesky. We are Comic Timing on Bluesky, and we're also on Threads and Instagram as Comic Timing Podcast. And of course, you can find the YouTube content for Comic Timing over at Comic Timing Podcast on YouTube. And we really do hope you guys check that out as well, as we love putting out video content for you guys. And hopefully there'll be some more short form stuff to come as well. And of course, any of you folks who have become patrons of the show over these past couple of months, we really, really do appreciate any little bit that you've thrown us over at patreon.com/comictiming. Thank you once again to Paul Spataro for letting me put this episode out. Thank you all once again for listening. And of course, as always, there's always time for comics.